I remember the day I first met Derek. My daughter Ellie brought him home one evening in late autumn, the kind where the Massachusetts wind carries the promise of snow. "Dad, this is Derek," she said, her eyes bright with that look I'd seen only a few times before, the look that told me this one was different. He had a firm handshake, this Derek. Educated at Boston University, working in finance, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him something. I didn't care for it much, but Ellie was 32 and had her mother's stubbornness. Catherine would have seen right through him, I think. But she'd been gone 5 years by then, and I'd promised her I wouldn't interfere in Ellie's life. "It's good to meet you, sir," Derek said, all polish and charm. "Ellie talks about you constantly." I nodded, offering the smile I'd perfected over 40 years in construction management, pleasant enough but revealing nothing. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." My home wasn't fancy, a modest three-bedroom in Medford I'd bought when property wasn't priced for millionaires. I'd added a sunroom for Catherine when she got sick, renovated the kitchen myself, built the back deck with my own hands on weekends. Everything in it represented hours of my labor, years of my life. As we ate the pot roast I'd prepared, Derek asked about my work. "I'm semi-retired now," I explained, refilling his wine glass. "Still consult on some projects, but mostly I manage my rental properties." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Properties, as in plural." "Just 4 small places," I said. "Nothing fancy. Invested my savings over the years instead of vacations." What I didn't mention was how I'd worked 80-hour weeks for decades, how I'd gone without to put Ellie through college debt-free, how I'd saved every bonus and lived below my means, while others my age bought boats and timeshares. "Dad built them himself," Ellie said proudly. "Well, not completely, but he did a lot of the work. He used to take me to the sites when I was little." Derek nodded, but I recognized the look recalculating my net worth in his head. I changed the subject. "So, Derek, Ellie tells me you're at Beacon Financial now. Senior investment advisor," he said, sitting straighter. "Just made the move from Hartford Capital last month. Better trajectory. And you like it there?" "It's where I need to be right now," he answered, which wasn't really an answer at all. That should have been my first warning. A man who can't speak plainly about whether he enjoys his work is usually chasing something other than satisfaction. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, married. I gave them my blessing because it made Ellie happy, though the knot in my stomach never quite went away. At the wedding, I danced with my daughter under strings of garden lights, her mother's locket around her neck catching the glow. "Are you happy, Ellie girl?" I asked, using her childhood nickname. "The happiest, Dad," she said, and rested her head on my shoulder like she used to do when she was small. I wanted to believe her. And for a while, it seemed I was wrong about Derek. They bought a condo in Cambridge with a small loan from me for the down payment that I never expected to see again. Derek appeared to be doing well at his firm. Ellie cut back her hours as a physical therapist when they started talking about children. It was around their second anniversary when things began to change. Derek started his own investment firm, Pinnacle Wealth Management. I was surprised, having heard nothing about these plans during our monthly dinners. "It's happening very quickly," Ellie explained over coffee at my kitchen table. "An opportunity came up with some of his colleagues. They needed to move fast. Starting a business takes capital," I said carefully. "We've got savings, Dad, and the investors are putting in most of it." I nodded, but something felt off. The market had been volatile and new financial firms were struggling. But again, I'd promised Catherine not to interfere. A month later, Ellie called asking if I'd meet with Derek. "He has a business proposition for you," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Derek arrived at my house in a new Tesla, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. We sat in my sunroom where the afternoon light cast long shadows across the floor. "Frank," he said, "I'll get right to the point. Your properties are underperforming." I raised an eyebrow. "They're paid for. Tenants are good people who stay long-term. I charge fair rent and make a steady income." "Exactly the problem," Derek slid a folder across the table. "You're leaving money on the table. Significant money." Inside were glossy projections showing how, with repositioning and market rate adjustments, my 4 modest rental homes could generate nearly double the income. "And what happens to my tenants? The Castillos have been in that house for 12 years. Patricia is a nurse who works nights. The Wilsons are retired school teachers." Derek waved his hand dismissively. "The market is the market, Frank. They'll find places they can afford." "They can afford these places because I keep their rent fair," I said, closing the folder. "Not everyone views housing as a way to maximize returns." "Which brings me to my proposal," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Pinnacle has investors looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. We'd buy your properties at 15% above market value. You'd make a substantial profit and be completely liquid." "I'm not interested in selling." "Frank," Derek leaned forward, "you're what, 65 now?" "63. "Right. Wouldn't you rather enjoy your retirement instead of dealing with tenant calls about leaky faucets? With this money, you could travel, buy that boat you've always wanted." "I've never wanted a boat," I said flatly. Derek looked genuinely confused. He couldn't fathom someone not wanting to extract maximum value, not wanting more than they needed. It was foreign to him. "Just think about it," he said finally. "For Ellie's sake. She worries about you managing all this as you get older." That hit its mark, as he knew it would. "I'll think about it," I conceded. Later that night I called Ellie. "Your husband came to see me today." "I know, isn't it exciting? Derek says you could make a huge profit." "I built those houses, Ellie. I know every joist and stud. Your mother picked out the kitchen tiles in the Maple Street place." There was a pause. "Dad, no one's trying to erase your memories. But Derek says property management is going to get more complicated with new regulations. He's just looking out for you." "Is he? Or is he looking out for his investors?" "That's not fair." "He's family now," I sighed, not wanting to argue. "I said I'd think about it, and I will." But the truth was, I'd already decided. Those properties weren't just investments, they were part of my life's work. Each represented years of overtime, careful saving, weekends spent doing the renovations myself. They were my retirement security and my legacy to Ellie someday. What I didn't know then was that Derek had already made promises to his investors about acquiring my properties, or that those investors weren't quite what they seemed. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Bill Turner, my accountant for the past 20 years. "Frank, did you authorize someone to access your financial records?" My blood went cold. "No." "Why?" "Someone called claiming to be from your bank, asking for verification of your property tax payments and mortgage status. They had your social security number and new details about your accounts." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I said I'd need signed authorization. But Frank, they knew things they shouldn't have known." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. That evening, I checked my home office and found nothing out of place, but a nagging feeling persisted. I started keeping my important documents in a small safe I installed behind a false panel in my closet. Something I'd built years ago when Catherine's jewelry had been worth protecting. Over the next few months, Derek became increasingly insistent about my properties. Each time his offers grew slightly more attractive, and each time I politely declined. Ellie started calling less frequently. When we did speak, she sounded strained. "Derek's just very busy with the firm," she'd say. "It's taking off faster than they expected." I tried to visit them once, bringing Ellie's favorite apple pie from the bakery near my house. Derek's home office door was open when I passed by, and I glimpsed multiple screens showing property listings, including detailed information about my own properties. I didn't mention it, but that night I called my insurance agent and increased my coverage, adding specific riders for identity theft protection. It was Patricia Nguyen, my tenant on Maple Street, who gave me the first concrete warning. She called one evening, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry to bother you, but someone came by today saying they were doing an appraisal for the new owners. They asked if they could take measurements inside. Patricia, I haven't sold the house. I'm not planning to sell the house. A pause. That's what I thought. I didn't let them in, but they took pictures from outside. They had documents that looked official. After reassuring her, I hung up and sat heavily in my kitchen chair. This had gone beyond persistent business proposals. Someone was actively laying groundwork to take my properties I had no intention of selling. The next day, I visited my bank and discovered someone had inquired about my mortgage payoff amounts mortgages that had been fully paid for years. The bank officer looked uncomfortable. "It was your son-in-law, Mr. Reynolds. We assumed you knew." I kept my face neutral. "Of course, just checking the communication chain, thank you." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Catherine's old reading chair, a tumbler of bourbon in my hand, thinking about what to do. By morning, I had a plan. First, I visited my lawyer, Andrew Kaplan, who'd handled my affairs since Catherine's illness. I updated my will, adding specific language about my properties and their disposition. Then I contacted each of my tenants, reassuring them that no sale was imminent and formalizing longer-term lease agreements at the same rates they'd been paying. Next, I hired a private investigator, something I'd never imagined doing. Mike Daniels was a retired Boston PD detective who now worked select cases. I explained the situation, including my suspicions about Derek's business. "So your son-in-law wants your properties, and you think he's using less than honest means to pressure you," Mike summarized. "I need to know what I'm dealing with," I said. "For my protection and for my daughters." Mike nodded. "I'll look into Pinnacle Wealth Management and your son-in-law's activities." Discreetly. While waiting for Mike's findings, I installed security cameras at each of my rental properties and my own home. I also began transferring important documents to a safe deposit box at a different bank than the one I normally used. 3 weeks later, Mike called. "We need to meet." At a quiet coffee shop in Arlington, he slid a folder across the table. "Your son-in-law's firm is essentially a house of cards," he said quietly. "They're using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors." "A Ponzi scheme," I said, the words tasting bitter. "Not quite there legally, but walking the line. They're making big promises based on real estate plays that haven't materialized. Your properties were supposed to be their first major acquisition, the proof of concept to attract larger investors." I flipped through the documents, bank records showing circular money movements, marketing materials with wildly optimistic projections, a list of investors that included several elderly clients, and shockingly, a trust in Ellie's name. "My daughter has money with them," Mike nodded grimly. "A substantial amount. It appears to have come from an account in her name around the time the firm was founded. The inheritance from Catherine. The money that was supposed to give Ellie security if anything happened to me." "There's more," Mike said. "They're underwater. The regulatory filing fees, the fancy office, Derek's Tesla, it's all being funded by new investments while they try to land a big score. Your properties would give them just enough legitimate collateral to keep going a while longer." I thanked Mike, paid him generously, and went home to think. The violation was profound, not just of my finances, but of my trust. Derek had taken advantage of his position in our family, had potentially put Ellie's inheritance at risk, and had actively worked to undermine my financial security. That night, I received a text from Ellie. "Dad, can you come to dinner tomorrow? Good news to share." I replied that I'd be there, though I dreaded what this good news might be. Their condo was immaculate as always, with the expensive minimalist furniture Ellie had once described as investment pieces. Derek opened the door with a broad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Frank, great to see you." Ellie hugged me tightly. "Dad, we have something to tell you." Over a dinner I barely tasted, they announced they were expecting my first grandchild. In any other circumstance, it would have been the happiest news. I hugged Ellie, shook Derek's hand, said all the right things. Inside, my heart was breaking. My grandchild would be born into a house built on lies. "There's something else," Derek said as Ellie cleared the plates. "A business opportunity I think you'll want to reconsider now. Of course, the real purpose of the dinner. We're planning to buy a house, Ellie called from the kitchen. Now that we're having a baby, we need more space. Derek lowered his voice. My investors have authorized me to increase the offer for your properties by another 10%. With a grandchild on the way, I know you'll want to help secure Ellie's future. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. Almost? Congratulations on the baby, I said, standing up. I need some time to process all this good news. I'll call you tomorrow, Ellie. That night I made my decision. If Derek wanted to play hardball, he'd learn I hadn't spent 40 years in business without learning how to protect myself. The next morning, I called Andrew Kaplan. I need to make some changes to my estate planning, I explained, and I need your absolute discretion. Over the next few days, I created a trust for my future grandchild, placing 2 of my properties into it with strict conditions about their management. For the other 2 properties, I established a separate entity that would maintain affordable housing for the current tenants and their families as long as they wish to remain. None of the properties would ever be owned by Derek or his company. Next, I contacted a friend at the State Banking Commission, Robert Chen, whom I'd known since we served on a community development board together. Without mentioning Derek or Pinnacle specifically, I asked general questions about reporting concerns regarding investment advisors. Funny you should ask, Robert said. We've had a few calls about a new firm making unusual promises. Small world, I nodded. Very small. The final piece of my plan was the hardest. I invited Ellie to lunch, just the 2 of us, at the small Italian place where we'd always celebrated her birthdays when she was growing up. Dad, about the other night, she began as soon as we sat down. Derek says you seemed upset about our news. Not about the baby, I said carefully. I couldn't be happier about becoming a grandfather. She studied my face. But something's wrong. I took her hand across the table. Ellie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The money your mother left you, is it still in the trust account? Her eyes widened slightly, then she looked down. Most of it. We used some for the condo down payment. And the rest, a long pause. Derek invested it in Pinnacle. It's going to grow much faster there than in that conservative trust fund. Did he tell you what he invested it in? Dad, Derek knows what he's doing. He's a professional. I squeezed her hand. Ellie girl, I need you to listen very carefully. I have reason to believe Pinnacle may not be as solid as Derek claims. Her face hardened. Is that why you won't sell him your properties? You don't trust him. I've had some concerning information come to light. I'd like you to speak with my accountant just to review the investments. She pulled her hand away. You've never given Derek a chance. From day one, you've judged him because he didn't work with his hands or because he has ambition. That's not true. It is. And now that we're having a baby, you're trying to drive a wedge between us. Ellie? No. She stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you try to undermine my husband. Derek has done nothing but try to help you secure your retirement, and you fought him every step of the way. As she stormed out, leaving her untouched lunch, I felt a deep ache in my chest. Catherine would have known how to handle this better. She always knew what to say to our headstrong daughter. That evening, Derek called. His voice was cold, controlled. Frank, I don't appreciate you upsetting Ellie in her condition. Her condition is precisely why I'm concerned, I replied evenly. I want to ensure my daughter and grandchild are financially secure. By implying I'm mismanaging our money, by refusing opportunities that would benefit all of us. Derek, let me be very clear. My properties are not for sale, not to you, not to Pinnacle, not to anyone. They are my legacy to my family to be managed according to my wishes. A pause. You know, Frank, I've tried to be respectful of your simplistic approach to wealth management, but you're being irrational and frankly selfish. Is that right? Yes, and I think it's time Ellie understood just how selfish. You've had a good run, living off the labor of your tenants while contributing nothing of value yourself. Maybe it's time she sees you for what you really are, an old man who can't adapt to the modern economy. The mask had finally slipped. Goodbye, Derek, I said and hung up. The next day, I received a certified letter from Pinnacle Wealth Management, offering to purchase my properties at 25% above market value, with the stipulation that the offer would decrease by 5% each month if not accepted. It was signed by Derek as CEO and included language suggesting tax consequences if I continued to operate rental properties without proper licensing. It was a threat, poorly disguised as a business offer. I took the letter to Andrew, who confirmed what I already knew. There were no licensing issues with my properties. All were properly registered, insured, and maintained according to code. This borders on harassment, Andrew said, frowning at the letter, and potentially constitutes attempted coercion. I don't want to escalate this legally yet, I said, not with Ellie caught in the middle. But privately, I was gathering my evidence, the unauthorized inquiries into my finances, the false appraisal attempts, Derek's threatening call, and now this letter. I created duplicate records of everything, storing copies with Andrew and in my safe deposit box. 3 days later, Mike Daniels called with an update. Pinnacle's in trouble, he said without preamble. They've been making payments to earlier investors with new investment money, but the new money is drying up. Your son-in-law is getting desperate. How desperate? There's talk among former colleagues that he's been approaching elderly clients from his previous firm, pitching exclusive investment opportunities. Classic affinity fraud tactics. I thanked Mike and asked him to continue monitoring the situation. That same day, I received a text from Ellie asking if we could talk. We agreed to meet at my house the following evening. She arrived looking tired, the early stages of pregnancy evident in her face. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation," she began as we sat in the kitchen. "I know you're just looking out for me." "Always," I said simply. "But you need to understand Derek's under a lot of pressure with the firm. These early stages of a business are critical. The investors are expecting results. What happens if those results don't materialize?" She shifted uncomfortably. "They will. Derek just needs some initial successes to build momentum. Like acquiring my properties." "Yes, exactly." She leaned forward. "Dad, this isn't just about business. It's about our family's future. The baby's future." "I'm concerned about that too," I said carefully, "which is why I've updated my estate planning to ensure both you and the baby are protected." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means I've placed the properties in trusts that will benefit you and your child while ensuring they continue to provide affordable housing. But they won't be available for Derek to purchase." "No," she stood up abruptly. "So you're still refusing to help us?" "Ellie, I think there are things about Derek's business you don't fully understand. What I understand is that my father is standing in the way of my husband's success because he can't let go of control." She grabbed her purse. "Derek was right about you." As she reached the door, I called after her. "What exactly did Derek say about me?" She paused, hand on the doorknob. "That you've lived your whole life taking advantage of others, charging rent instead of creating value. That you can't stand to see someone like him succeed because it threatens your old-fashioned worldview." The words stung, not because they contained any truth, but because my daughter had believed them. "I love you, Ellie," I said quietly. "That will never change. When you're ready to really talk about this, I'm here." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, looking at old photographs, Ellie's graduation, Catherine's last birthday, the four of us at the rental property on Maple Street the day I finished renovating it. A lifetime of honest work and careful planning, dismissed as exploitation by someone who'd never built anything real in his life. 2 weeks passed with no word from Ellie. I continued my routine, checking on my properties, meeting with tenants, consulting on a construction project for an old colleague. But inside, I was preparing for what I knew was coming. It arrived in the form of a notice from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my accounts using my personal information. The bank had flagged it as suspicious because the request came from an IP address in the financial district, nowhere near my home. The next day, Patricia called again. Mr. Reynolds, someone from the city, was here saying there had been complaints about code violations. They insisted on inspecting the property. Did they have identification? Official paperwork? Yes, but, she hesitated. It seemed odd. They focused on taking pictures of things that weren't problems: the new water heater you installed, the updated electrical panel. I thanked her and immediately called the city inspector's office. They had no record of a complaint or inspection at that address. The pressure was increasing. Derek was trying to create problems where none existed, possibly to force a sale through regulatory channels. But he had underestimated my preparations. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Derek standing there in an expensive overcoat, his face set in a grim expression. "We need to talk, Frank." I stepped aside to let him in, noting the sleek black car idling at the curb with someone still inside. "Would you like a drink?" I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "This isn't a social call." He remained standing in my living room, glancing around with barely disguised contempt at my comfortable but modest furnishings. "Then state your business." "My investors are losing patience. The deal we discussed needs to happen now, or there will be consequences." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me in my own home, Derek?" He smiled thinly. "Not threatening, warning. If you continue to be difficult, I'll have no choice but to advise Ellie that all contact with you should cease, for the sake of her health and our child's. That's her decision to make." "Is it?" "She trusts my judgment, Frank. She believes in what we're building. All you're offering is obstruction and outdated thinking." He stepped closer. "And let's be honest, your financial situation isn't as solid as you pretend. The medical bills from Catherine's illness, the money you've given Ellie over the years. You need this deal more than you're admitting." The fact that he knew about Catherine's medical expenses, information that was in my password-protected files, confirmed my suspicions about how far he'd gone in violating my privacy. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. "Think about it, Frank. 25% premium, clean break, no more tenant headaches. Or," he shrugged, "the alternative could get messy for everyone." After he left, I checked my security cameras. The person in the car had remained there throughout Derek's visit, not close enough to hear our conversation but present nonetheless. A witness? Backup? I couldn't be sure. The next morning, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. First, I contacted Robert Chen at the Banking Commission. "I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding Pinnacle Wealth Management," I said, and laid out the evidence Mike had gathered about their questionable business practices. Next, I spoke with Andrew about filing a restraining order based on Derek's implied threats and the pattern of harassment. "We have enough for a temporary order at least," Andrew confirmed, "and it creates an official record." Finally, I made the hardest call to Bill Turner, my accountant. "Bill, I need you to contact Ellie directly. Tell her you're concerned about some transactions you've noticed related to her inheritance trust. Say nothing about me asking you to call." Bill, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed immediately. 3 days later, as I was returning from checking on the Wilsons' property where a minor plumbing issue needed repair, I found Ellie sitting on my front steps. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. "Dad," she said as I approached, her voice breaking, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." Inside, over tea she barely touched, the story emerged. Bill had called her, expressing concern about withdrawals from her trust. When Ellie investigated, she discovered Derek had moved nearly all of her inheritance into Pinnacle Investments, using her electronic signature on documents she didn't remember signing. When confronted, Derek had dismissed her concerns, saying it was standard procedure and that she was being hormonal about normal business operations. "But it wasn't just that," she said, staring into her cup. "It was the way he talked about you, like he hated you, called you a parasite living off honest people's hard work." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He said it in front of his whole team on his first day. Used you as an example of the kind of landlord their investments would replace. Said this man lives off others, while showing them pictures of your properties. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. Not just financial manipulation, but public humiliation, using me as a prop in his business narrative. There's more, she whispered. I found emails about creating code violations at your properties, about accessing your accounts. She put her head in her hands. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I moved to sit beside her, putting my arm around her shoulders. It's not your fault, Ellie girl. What do I do now, with the baby coming? First, we protect what's yours, I said firmly. The trusts I've set up will ensure you and the baby have security, regardless of what happens with Derek. Over the next few hours, I outlined what I'd learned about Pinnacle and the steps I'd already taken. Ellie listened in shocked silence, occasionally wiping away tears. I can't believe I defended him to you, she said finally. After everything you've done for me. You loved him. You wanted to believe in him. She nodded miserably. What happens now? That depends partly on you, I said gently. Are you willing to provide a statement about what you've discovered? After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Yes, for the baby's sake, for mine, and for you, Dad. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Ellie moved back into my house temporarily, filing for separation from Derek. She provided sworn statements to the Banking Commission about Pinnacle's practices and to my lawyer about Derek's attempts to pressure me into selling my properties. Derek, realizing his scheme was unraveling, made increasingly desperate attempts to contact Ellie. When she wouldn't respond, he showed up at my house late one night, pounding on the door and demanding to see her. The security cameras captured everything, including his drunken threats, evidence that strengthened our case for the restraining order. The Banking Commission moved swiftly, freezing Pinnacle's accounts pending investigation. Several investors came forward with similar stories of pressure tactics and misleading statements. Derek's two partners quickly distanced themselves, claiming they'd been unaware of his methods. 3 months later, Derek accepted a plea deal on charges of fraud and financial misconduct. The terms included restitution to investors, a ban from the securities industry, and a suspended sentence contingent on his continued compliance. Pinnacle was dissolved, its assets liquidated to partially repay investors. Ellie filed for divorce, which Derek didn't contest, likely because fighting would have exposed him to further scrutiny. A paternity test confirmed the baby was his, but he showed little interest in being involved, agreeing to terminate his parental rights in exchange for Ellie not pursuing additional financial claims against him. On a clear September morning, I sat in the hospital room holding my grandson, James Franklin Reynolds, named for me and Catherine's father. Ellie watched from her bed, exhausted but peaceful. "He has your eyes," she said softly. "Poor kid," I replied, making her laugh. "Dad," she said after a moment, "I've been thinking about what Derek said about you, that you live off others." "Have you?" She nodded. "It's such a twisted way to see what you've done. You didn't just collect rent, you created homes. You maintained them, made them safe and comfortable. You treated your tenants like people, not income streams." I looked down at James, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. "Your mother and I always believed in building something real, something that would last." "You did," Ellie said, "and not just the houses." Over the following year, Ellie and James continued living with me while she resumed her physical therapy practice part-time. Together, we created a new family rhythm, different from what either of us had imagined but solid in its own way. I eventually learned from Mike Daniels that Derek had moved to Florida, working at his uncle's car dealership and living in a rented apartment, a far cry from the wealthy future he'd envisioned. The investors who lost money in Pinnacle had filed civil suits that would follow him for years. As for my properties, they remained exactly what I'd always intended them to be: safe, affordable homes for good people. The trusts I'd established ensured they would continue that way long after I was gone, providing security for Ellie and James while honoring the principles Catherine and I had lived by. On James's first birthday, we had a small celebration in the backyard. The Castillos came, bringing a handmade blanket for James. The Wilsons brought a wooden train set. Patricia brought a cake she'd baked herself. As I watched Ellie helping James blow out his single candle, surrounded by people who had become more like family than tenants, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Derek had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what constitutes a meaningful life. It isn't about extracting maximum value or clever financial maneuvers. It's about building something worthwhile, treating others with dignity, and leaving the world a little better than you found it. That evening, after everyone had gone and James was asleep, Ellie and I sat on the back deck I'd built with my own hands 30 years earlier. You know, she said, looking up at the stars, I think Mom would be proud of how things turned out. I smiled, thinking of Catherine and how she would have adored our grandson. She always did believe things work out the way they're supposed to, even when the path gets rough. I'm starting to think she was right, Ellie said, resting her head on my shoulder just like she used to do. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Derek had thought he could take what I'd spent a lifetime building, not understanding that its true value lay not in property assessments or potential profits, but in the security and legacy it represented. He had seen me as someone who lived off others, never recognizing that my success came from helping others live better. In the end, justice hadn't required elaborate revenge, only the patient revelation of truth. Derek's own greed and dishonesty had been his undoing, while the principles he'd mocked had sustained Ellie and me through the crisis he created. Some might call it karma. I simply call it the natural consequence of choosing the wrong foundations upon which to build a life. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.